Good to be back.
Yeah, this is I think the third mention of you now at
Oh my.
PitchCon because there was the blind co-manager draft presentation yesterday, and they were so pleasantly surprised that they had a future Hall of Fame FSWA inductee as their co-manager. So if you haven't seen that, you should take a quick look at it maybe when it's on YouTube next week.
I was there for the unveiling, and
Yes.
it was fantastic. And so some of the antics and the dynamics between the co-managers were just priceless. So definitely worth checking out.
It's an absolute joy. But anyway, I'm not gonna delay anymore. Thanks so much for being a part of this so much.
I'm happy to.
Randy, welcome, man.
What's up? How are you guys? Doing well.
Well, thank you so much for being here. Randy, tell everybody about yourself.
Wow, putting me on the spot. Filmmaker, directing the Derek Jeter 30 for 30, the captain for ESPN, 6 episodes. Obnoxious and arrogant Yankee fan. I think that covers most of it. But filmmaker in New York City, grew up and was raised in the Bronx, and now I live in Queens, and love baseball, and I'm happy to be here. And thank you for having me for a second straight year. It means a lot.
Oh man, absolutely. It's an honor that you're here. I think Britt has a little bit of a technical difficulty at the moment, but you guys just start ahead, and I'll bring her in when she's ready. Okay?
Sounds good.
Perfect. All right, Randy, thanks for joining me, and we'll have Britt on in just a second. It's a pleasure to meet you. I've been a fan of yours. Your Twitter feed has been great, and in fact, I don't want to embarrass you, but my pinned tweet is one that you had that I commented on about diversity in baseball and lifting up all the diverse voices. We need more of that in baseball, in fantasy baseball, in all areas of baseball. So I thank you for saying that. That was something that I felt was very needed. And there she is. Congratulations. Welcome, Britt Ghiroli from The Athletic. I guess we had the intro for Randy, made him do it himself. But I can do that for you too, or you can, Britt. But for those who don't know, I think a lot of people do. Britt Ghiroli has spent a decade as a beat writer for MLB.com. She moved to The Athletic a couple of years ago and was named DC Sports Writer of the Year in 2019 from the National Sports Media Association. And we are thrilled to have her here with us as well. Welcome, Britt.
Thanks for having me, guys. Sorry I'm a few minutes late. I am on assignment so I'm in a hotel and we had to check out by 2. So I was like scrambling to throw all my stuff in the bag, and now I'm in like the office area of the hotel. So.
All right. Fantastic. So glad to have you.
Sorry, I didn't clean up behind me. It was like hand sanitizer and stuff on the table. Sorry.
That's the kind of relaxed vibe we're working with, I think, today, which is good. I'll start things off by saying, here we are with Pitcher List and PitchCon. There's a lot of talk, a lot of fantasy baseball talk, a lot of numbers being thrown around, and I think the word narrative kind of gets a bad name among the fantasy community and the analytic community because it's a way I think that a lot of people feel is an easy way or a lazy way to explain why something happens when you have all these numbers, and that's a much better way. But I think too, when you talk about the narrative, and in this case with this group, storytelling in general, I think we try and find the way to say why something happens and the reasons behind and the stories behind these athletes or these teams, and how that translates into what we learn and what we want to tell everybody out there. So let's start with your stories personally, and I'll start with Randy, and then we'll go to Britt. Randy, how did you develop, we're talking baseball, how did you develop your interest in the sport of baseball?
It was always there, to be quite honest. It was something that I think my mom used as kind of like a parenting tool when she needed a break from me when I was young. Just put me in front of a TV screen and have the baseball game on so I would calm down. It's always been in my blood. I played through college. I had a tryout with the Kansas City Royals when I was in college. So it's, as far as I'm concerned, it's part of my identity. It's my number one love. I know I do film and I love that, but this is at the top of the list. And quite honestly, I don't know where it started or how it started, but it's always been a part of my life, and just kept rolling with it. It always makes me happy. So that's how I ended up with a love for baseball.
Fabulous. Family, very big. Britt, I imagine same case with you.
Yes, same case. My dad, I'm from Connecticut, was a huge, huge Yankees fan. And, he'd go to a lot of the games, just take the train up. And we have actually had in my garage growing up a stadium from old Yankee Stadium from one of the last games there. People were just popping their seats out and taking them. So my dad and uncle both have a seat, which is very cool. And my dad was into all sports, but for some reason we gravitated toward baseball. My sisters and I all played softball. I'm one of 4 children. And I think, you kind of realize early on, or at least I did, that like you're going to hit a wall where I swam in college and that was it. No one was going to care about my athletic career anymore. And so for me, the next logical step to playing sports and getting paid, well, the second best thing in my book was to get paid to watch people play sports. And that's kind of where I am and how I sit here today, because I just thought it was the coolest job ever and not even a real job. And I still feel like that.
So let's build on that point then. You have an interest in baseball, in sports. You think you want to write about it or watch sports or be part of it. How then did you get to the point where you were becoming a sports writer for MLB.com and for The Athletic, and now being a national columnist?
Yeah, so when I graduated from Michigan State, I had a bunch of like small newspaper offers, and I also had a internship offer with MLB.com. And a lot of people told me, take the job. It's a sure thing. Internships end. And I just couldn't get over the opportunity to be around big leaguers already, the opportunity to watch big league games and interview them, even if it was only a 6-month internship. I just felt like it was an opportunity I couldn't let go. And I'm so glad I didn't, because I interned in Tampa Bay, and this was back in 2008 when they were just shedding that Devil Rays. They had the new uniforms, the whole new identity. And everyone told me all spring, like, don't worry, they're terrible. And I was 20 years old and so excited about every spring training win. I'd call my dad and we'd rehash it, like you're so into it. You're still a fan. You haven't really crossed over. And long story short, they go to the World Series that year out of nowhere. And, every year, every week the Rays advanced, I got paid per week. When the Rays were done, I was done. So I was rooting for them so hard on the inside, guys, because it was another $500 every week that they played. So it was pretty incredible. And then I, freelanced, moved home back to Connecticut, freelanced for a year or two, and then ended up getting the Orioles job for MLB.com in 2010. So I always say that if the 2008 Rays weren't that good, I wouldn't be here today. Like, I'm a product of the 2008 Rays being a good team, allowing me to network, allowing me to make contacts, and build my resume in a way that you couldn't have really imagined from February to October with them.
Real quick, did you feel like they were going to be a good team when you saw them in spring training?
I did, but everyone was like, shut up, you're 20 years old. You've never been around here. You don't know what you're talking about. I was like, I feel like there's something special about this team. They're fun. They seem great. And everyone else was like, no, just be quiet over there. Like you haven't been around long enough to be jaded. A lot of sports writers are jaded. And I was just so excited to be there. So excited with every win. And I think people didn't really believe it was happening until basically it had already happened. But I always believed, and selfishly, I wanted them to keep winning because it just meant more money for me.
Nice. Randy, how about you? Have you always wanted to be in filmmaking? And how does baseball weave its way into there?
No, I did not want to be a filmmaker growing up. I honestly didn't even know that was kind of a path for kids from the Bronx, to be quite honest. I always thought it was like Spike Lee and Spielberg and Scorsese, and it was just magic that kind of appeared on a screen. So I was very naive about access to filmmaking and the opportunities to make it and the opportunities to learn the craft. I had my senior year torn my ACL. and I had to take an art class to graduate on time, and I had dropped art classes my entire time at undergrad. I just dropped all of them. I had no interest in art. I thought it was silly. I was like, I'm not doing this. And I had to take a video narrative course to graduate on time. And it was taught by a film professor who was an alum of the college, and she made it accessible, and she made it very clear that you can learn the craft of filmmaking, and there are tools in place to make it much easier to tell stories. And when she started showing us films and how to break down films, it felt like a second language to me. Like I understood it immediately, and I knew what she was talking about, and I understood that language that I was seeing on the screen, and it just changed my life immediately because I just intrinsically understood what was going on now that somebody had explained craft to me. So my senior year, I kind of developed this love for filmmaking out of the blue. I had hurt my knee, and I had to come back in 2001 in the fall to complete my studies so I could get my degree. And that was when 9/11 happened. So when I graduated officially with my degree, it was the winter of 2001. I didn't want to come back to New York because it was too much chaos, a lot of uncertainty, and like looking for a job, and like, am I going to grad school? What am I doing? And I just came up with this idea to do a documentary on a Black-owned barbershop in the white side of town in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. I made this doc. I pitched it to the school to like let me stick around for one more semester. They accepted the proposal. I didn't know what I was doing. And at Franklin or Marshall, where I went, the town community and the school community were separate. They were segregated, to be quite honest. And this film that I did kind of brought those two worlds together and allowed a community to kind of foster moving forward for certain parts of Lancaster and certain aspects of the school community. And that's when I kind of caught the bug that filmmaking could impact people. And that was really the reason why I wanted to pursue filmmaking, was because I could directly see the impact on people's lives, and stories that I was telling were directly impacting people. And then just with baseball, I think it just kind of happened naturally. Obviously, I talk a lot about baseball on social media. And I think a lot of things that I was talking about caught people's attention. You mentioned that Twitter thread I had a couple years ago. And I think that opened up more opportunities for baseball and film to kind of merge. People approached me from MLB, and this Jeter thing was coming together in the background, but I couldn't talk about it for a while. So I think just naturally my love for baseball kind of led me in that direction, and then the two things just merged together.
We'll definitely hit on the Jeter 30 for 30 here in a little bit. But you mentioned Spike Lee. You've had a chance to work with him too as well, correct?
Yeah, I basically grew up under him in the film sense. Pretty much my entire adult life has been connected to Spike. I met him at Franklin and Marshall, and then he helped me get into NYU grad film school, and I worked with him starting on Inside Man. I was an editorial intern on Inside Man, and then I was with him all the way through a couple years ago. I ended up being one of his editors and trusted collaborators, and I always joke he's like my film dad. So yeah, he's had a big impact on me personally, and is really the reason why I'm in film and in the film business, to be quite honest. He kind of just mentored me in his way. I mean, it wasn't he didn't sit me down and tell me things. It was always through experience. And of course, like a huge sports fan. So I think that when
we know that,
yeah. So like when, it was just a love of film, a love of sports that brought us together. Actually, when I met him, we had an argument about Pat the Bat Burrell.
Oh dear.
And I went to
from
school.
The 2008 World Series, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So this was a little bit before that. He was still in the Phillies, and I didn't like him as a player. So I was just like, he stinks. But, I'm like talking like a fan or whatever. And he kept saying, but he's in the major leagues. Like, how is he bad? And I'm like, well, he's bad for a major leaguer. So that's how we kind of like connected on that, and then just started moving forward and started working together.
Fantastic. I want to say, baseball has been criticized, I think, for being only interesting to old white guys, for lack of a better term. But you two are both examples that that's not true. And Britt, I think the big story this month, or at least one of the big stories, was Rachel Balkovec being named manager of the single A team for the Yankees. How big, just to talk a little bit about that, how big is that in MLB? And do you see that being a sign that progress is being made with women becoming more involved in the game, on the field, in the front office, and being represented in those spots?
So it's funny. I was just at lunch with a couple scouts who live in this area, and she came up. This exact question came up. They wanted to know, did I feel better? Because there's so many women that are being hired now in various capacities. And I think it's encouraging. I'm also wondering why these dozen or so women weren't hired before this. Rachel, to me, is a great example. I've known Rachel for 10 years, and she's been in the game for 10 years. She has a PhD. She speaks Spanish. She wants to be a GM someday. Why has nobody hired her to be in the front office before this? Why it's great that she's managed, but she made it very clear in her press conference that she didn't really see the manager as the path to get to the GM, right? She's going to take the job. The Yankees approached her. They talked to her about leadership, and I think she's going to be terrific. But I think we can look at this and we can say, yay, a woman manager. But I look at it and I say, why didn't someone hire Rachel years ago? Right?
Mm-hmm.
We're like, why? And I think we've seen this in the NFL and head coaches. Like, why do women and black men have to be, or black women, because there's black women in baseball as well, have to be so overqualified before they get even to that first barrier? That's what still bothers me. Why was Rachel? We made a huge deal about Rachel, but Bianca Smith was hired by the Red Sox last year. I didn't see Rob Manfred give a statement. I didn't see nearly the outpouring of support for Bianca that I saw for Rachel. So I think we're making progress, and I don't want it to sound like we're not. But I often wonder why it's taken so long, and also, is that progress for the right reasons, or are clubs simply parading these women out to say, "See, we have one"?
Very good questions. Hopefully, I guess she does at least, is visible enough in whatever the press conferences and the media availabilities that now people see her and say, oh, that's happening. And it becomes, as you said, less of a news story the next time it happens, but it continues to happen. We can keep our fingers crossed.
I also think that's why the importance of nuanced storytelling is so critical here. And the people telling those stories and the focus of those stories. Britt does a great job of doing that. There are other journalists and storytellers that do the same, but I don't think that there's enough. And I think that, Steve, you had mentioned earlier how certain baseball communities focus so much on the numbers and think that that's kind of like the primary focus, or should be the primary focus when we consume sports. And I think that they have a place. Like, this is not a debate about that. I'm in agreement, but I also think that there needs to be room for storytelling precisely because of these things. And that is ultimately, in my mind, the most important reason why these stories matter. And I think it's even more difficult now with the pandemic and not having access to these athletes, not being in the locker rooms and not being able to get those stories that go beyond the field. And I think it also heightens the importance of making sure that these stories are told, because it's a crucial element of the sports that we consume. Like, it's, Rachel wants to be something beyond just a minor league manager. And there are other women and people of color that are trying to accomplish the same thing. But I think also the public needs to be aware of who these people are. Like, right now we're in the NFL hiring period. And, certain guys are being hired because they're legacy hires. And, why did this guy get this job? And you start to, the storytellers tell you the stuff behind the scenes, and you start to connect the dots, and it becomes a part of this larger discussion, and you get a better explanation for why things are happening. So I think that that's one way in which storytelling matters and is a crucial piece of this, so that we get the full picture. And it's not just like we're given the news, we're given the information, and then we just go on about our business. There's something much larger going on.
That's a great point. And Britt, I would ask, maybe you may know as well as any of us, with the pandemic restrictions on the clubhouses, do you get the feeling that MLB kind of likes that restricted access and might be, inclined to try and, the relationship between the writers and the players is part of the CBA. Do you feel like MLB might want to keep those restrictions a little tight, hold on them and not allow writers as much access to the clubhouse and to players on the field and things like that?
So MLB has always said and continue to say that they want us in there. So I think that certain players don't want us in there. I think certain players understand what we do, but I think every year since I've started, the line between players and media has kind of gotten worse. There's a lot more distrust now than there used to be. I think especially in big markets, guys are afraid that their words are going to be taken out of context. And I think some players would prefer that we're never back in there. And, that's disheartening because I think we, as storytellers, as Randy said, like we can tell their side of the story. We can go where they don't want to go. And I think so many important conversations take place like that are whispered to you in locker rooms. And if they restrict that, then you're going to see just a much more bland game overall. And I kind of found myself, I think it was in 2020, maybe getting a little less into the game. And I think that's directly a result of just reading less human interest stories. I didn't know who to root for. I didn't know who was a good story. I didn't know who was a good guy. And I think, hold on, I'm like directly in the sun here now. I think when you when you look at things like with Randy and the Jeter documentary, he's going to open up who Jeter is to a whole different level, to a whole different fan base of people that had this preconceived notion of who he is or what he was about, right? That's what the MJ doc did. That's what a lot of these very powerful stories can do. And if we're not in there and people aren't allowed to tell these stories, these guys just become cardboard cutouts, right? There's no reason to root for these guys. There's no great stories to uncover. And I think that's a loss for everybody.
Yeah. Randy, how do you feel? Were you welcomed in, I guess, the Jeter doc in specific, because it's front of mind right now, but were you welcomed in? Were there roadblocks set up in front of you to do this? Tell us a little bit, maybe behind the scenes, how that's worked for you.
No roadblocks. I mean, it was really, it followed the same process that it would for any film when you're trying to get a project off the ground, or you're trying to, people are looking for a director or attached to something. You speak to the producers, and in this case, it's Mike Tolan, who also produced The Last Dance. Spike was an executive producer, or is an executive producer on this, so he felt like I was the right person to tell this story, just because, filmmaking ability, but also passion for the Yankees and living during that time with Jeter. And then once I spoke to Mike, I spoke to Derek, and I think that one important thing for him was having somebody on board that understood baseball and loved baseball, and didn't have to explain to that person what this is or why that mattered or what these times meant to him or the Yankees or the fan base, and had a pretty keen understanding of what's going on in the game, but also what was going on during that time. So I don't think there were any roadblocks. I think there was just an instant connection because, we both were passionate about baseball. And then I think it just went from there. For me, it's one of those rare instances where it was pretty smooth sailing. It doesn't hurt to have Spike's backing, obviously. So that obviously has a lot to do with it just to get in the door. But I think once there were conversations, I felt like it was a very natural kind of relationship building, and that's continued. There hasn't really been a roadblock to speak of or think of, to be quite honest.
Britt, how about you developing relationships with players? I mean, when you come in as an intern or a beat writer or a columnist, how difficult is that to develop that rapport to where players and managers and front office execs will confide in you and kind of trust you?
It's hard. I think early on in my career, especially, I found that I could relate to players better than I could relate to anybody else. I was their age. We listened to the same music. We liked, the same movies. Many times I was decades younger than the other reporters. And so early on, I kind of zeroed in on the players. I knew that you kind of needed a foundation before you get to the front office. And I still struggle with the front office. I think there's really kind of a old boys club mentality that still very much permeates through baseball. And there's those 3 or 4 reporters at the top that are in that club that get things. And then there's everybody else. And I think to get to that level is very difficult. And it's funny because people are like, oh, is it tough to get sources, as a woman? How tough is that for play? And I have no problem with the players. By the time these players get to the big leagues now, you're not the first woman they've seen in a clubhouse. You're not the first woman who's interviewed them. 99% of the time, you're not going to have a problem with the players. I find myself having more difficulty getting to know the coaches, getting to know the GMs, the AGMs, the presidents. I find that you almost have to prove yourself more to them. The players very quickly adapt. They very quickly trust you. I find that it's the old guard and more of like the old regime and the people who have been in baseball for a while that kind of their immediate reaction is kind of to hold you at arm's length, right? If you're a little different. They assume, and it still kind of bothers me today. I walk into a clubhouse or walk onto a field and I always wonder, like, do people think I only got this job because I'm female? Like you always wonder that. And I'm sure Randy can share some similar thoughts, but I'm always thinking that, like, okay, I always have to prove myself here, because if I mess up, if I say something wrong, it's not that I made a mistake. It's that I'm female. It's that I don't know what I'm doing. I don't belong here. I was a diversity hire or whatever else people are going to want to like quietly think. So I always feel like I have to prove myself. And I think the players are the most accepting of something that's different, if that makes sense. Yep.
Randy, do you feel like you have to prove yourself too whenever you start a project or do anything in relation to baseball?
Honestly, no, but I'm aware of it. Like I choose not to think about it. I know that it's there, but my choice is to just focus on the work at hand. Like, I'd rather just immerse myself in the story that I'm trying to tell and execute the vision that I have. So I know that it's there. I know that in doing like a high profile project like Jeter, there is probably a segment of the filmmaking community that's like, well, why does he have this job? Like, and I think specifically like in the sports doc community, I'm sure there are like veteran directors that when they heard that I was doing it, they were probably like, who is this guy? Like, how did he get it? All these like questions. So I also think that that's a very tight-knit community. And I think a lot of people know the same people. And I'm like outside of that box because I don't just focus on sports docs. Like I do things across the board. And there's nothing wrong with that. I don't want to come across as like demeaning or criticizing that community, but I'm pretty sure there are people that will be watching it very curious as to kind of proving to them that I deserve to tell this story. Like, this is kind of like a holy grail thing, and I'm aware of it. But at the same time, like, I'm fully confident in myself as a filmmaker. The people around me are fully confident in me. I know my abilities. I know I'm good at what I do. And I know the story that I want to tell, and it aligns with what Derek wants to tell and like what MSM wants to tell, the production company. And I think we're all in the same place. And as long as, and ESPN as well. So I think that as long as I'm focusing on the vision and executing it as well as it can be executed, that's all that matters. Like, all that other stuff is noise. That's not going to stop me. It's not going to make me give up what I'm doing. It comes with the territory, but I mean, I'm going to do what I'm going to do. And I'm sure it's true with Britt. I mean, we're all going to face it, but we have to do the things that we love to do and create the work that we love to create.
Yeah, you all were fans of baseball before getting into your profession. How is it, and Randy, I guess I'll start with you. How is it to meet, somebody who I would imagine was a favorite player of yours when you were watching him coming up in Derek Jeter? How is it to finally meet players, your favorite players, to work with your favorite players How is that dynamic for you? Because a lot of people I think that are watching this right now, would say, "Oh man, it would be so great if I could just sit down with my, favorite player from X team. That would be so great." You've gotten a chance to do that. How is that for you? And do you kind of have to, do a reality check sometime?
It's crazy. For real. I mean, the first time I met Derek was on a Zoom. It was in the middle of the pandemic, or the pandemic version 2020.
Mhm.
And I mean, I had to get it out of my system and just be like, look, let me just like fanboy for a second so I could get over it. And he understood. He knew what was going on. But I think the one thing is that you realize that they're just human beings. Like, they have accomplished a lot, but they're like people. And I know that kind of sounds cliche. A lot of people have said that. That's truly what it is. I mean, I've met great players through this project from multiple generations. So I've met Reggie Jackson, and Reggie Jackson almost felt like an elder to me by the time we were done interviewing him. Like, he was telling me things about life and being a black man in America, and being a black man in baseball, and all these things where I just felt like an elder was speaking to me. So you're not really thinking about, wow, this is Reggie Jackson. It's like, okay, this is somebody of the older generation that's imparting wisdom, like this person. And then you meet somebody like Darryl Strawberry, who's like cracking jokes every 2 seconds. And then you meet somebody like Bernie Williams, who's like the epitome of class. And it's like, they were so warm and welcome and excited to be a part of it that I think that they kind of let that shield down. And I think that part of it also is that they know that we're not the media, in a sense. Like, media,
Right.
this is different, and we're not like trying to probe or expose or like trying to find that angle. It's like it was in a different context. They were a little bit more relaxed coming into it, and they knew that it was for Derek, so that plays a role in it. But yeah, I mean, we hit it off with like everybody except for one guy. I won't say who that person is. I'll reveal it later. I don't want to trash anybody yet, at least. But yeah, like 99% of the people that we met were just genuine great people, including the media that we interviewed. We've interviewed a lot of journalists from that time. So everybody's they're just great people, and I think they immediately kind of like remove that barrier from what you see on TV as soon as they're there. And a lot of people were really excited to be there and be a part of it, and felt like, I think they felt special that we asked them to be a part of this story. So for some people, I was like, oh my God, this is crazy. Like, I'm actually meeting somebody that like I've seen play their entire career. And now we're just like hanging out in a green room, like talking, like we had known each other for 10 years. There is one player that I was like, this is like insane that he's here. So that was Roger Clemens. And I was just like, whoa. Like, because he doesn't do anything.
Is it the presence? His presence, or what?
It was everything. It was his presence, his size, like very large man. Like, I was just like, oh, like, you're bigger than I thought. And just how down to earth he was, or is. Like, I know that there's a lot surrounding him, like on a lot of levels. Like, I know that there's controversy all over the place, but like, just meeting him one-on-one, and like his energy and his excitement and candidness and energy was surprisingly like impressive. So yeah, I mean, it's been fun. It's been great. It's amazing.
Outstanding. Britt, how about you? I mean, coming into the business at age 20, I mean, these guys, you said a lot of them are your age. What was it like for you to suddenly be in the same area with players that you watched on TV, just a few years earlier?
Yeah, I think you get a little starstruck, like Randy said. I remember meeting Jeter the first year I was in Baltimore in 10. We obviously went to New York a lot. And it's a little surreal. A little voice in the back of your head is like, okay, this is Derek Jeter, you know, and you're trying to be cool and you're trying to be professional. And, you know, you immediately go and call your dad on your way home and tell him every single breakdown of the conversation. Because, like I said, my dad was a Yankees fan. So, you know, it just certain players, I don't really get starstruck now, though there's certain players that I think you grew up watching or that, you know, you kind of hold to a different standard than everyone else. Cal Ripken came by spring training one day, junior, and he had gotten a new phone, and he's talking to me and a couple of the reporters, and he's like, hey, let's test the camera out. Let's do a selfie. And you're like, Cal Ripken Jr. wants a selfie with us, with me, you know? And I have the photo still, and it's like a prized possession, you know? It's different than a Mike Trout to me, right? Like, because that guy is playing currently, and I just don't get super starstruck. But when you're talking about the older players, the players you grew up watching, I think it hits different. Like Randy said, it's like, whoa, you're here and you're normal and you're a person, and you do kind of forget that, especially when you're young and you watch them on TV. They're larger than life, and then you realize that most of these guys are just regular people. I would say, like Randy said, like 99% of them are really nice guys. You're gonna have a bad apple. I always get asked this, like, who are the jerks? And like, you always have a bad apple or two in any office. And that's kind of what I compare it to. It's, you know, most of these guys are nice, but you also have to acknowledge that we are the annoying people after they have a terrible start in their face. Like, hey, did you mean to throw that pitch down the middle? You know? So you also have to remember that how they treat you isn't necessarily a reflection of how they are normally. A lot of the game's emotions are still going. A lot of these guys are such great competitors. But I think by and large, like, I've kind of got over the starstruck stuff. Though I could listen to Randy talk about the Yankees and all these old players all day, because those are the guys I get starstruck about. Like, I'm sure you talked to Andy Pettit, who was another guy I met and was like, oh, this is Andy Pettit, you know?
Yep.
But again,
I could do an hour, I think, on just talking to Reggie Jackson. That's what I want to hear about.
Right. But again, I don't get nearly as starstruck like over an Aaron Judge, right? Or a John Carlos Stanton. You're like, whatever, it's the current Yankees. But the ones I grew up watching, the ones who like are embedded in your psyche, that's cool, right? You don't really get over that, I think, no matter what.
I will join. Go ahead, Randy.
Sorry. I think one of the best experiences we had so far, and there's been a lot, thankfully, was after we interviewed Willie Randolph. He hung out with us after the interview for like another hour. And, like, we talked about a range of things, like things with Major League Baseball, things outside of baseball. And while we were talking, I can think of my mom. Like, Willie Randolph was my mom's favorite player. And to just see this guy from Brooklyn just, like, you know, kicking it with us for an hour when he didn't have to. I mean, he was the last interview. We all could have left, but like, he was basically holding court with us. And just like sharing with us how he felt about the game now and like why he thinks he hasn't been a manager again. I mean, you know, like, we were having these like really in-depth conversations, and it's like, you're just thinking to yourself, they're like you. You know, like, they have viewpoints, they have perspectives. Sometimes they're restricted because of the consequences, because they're in the public eye. And that's one thing that I've really realized doing this as well, is that the level of consequence for figures in the public eye is so immense that part of the reason these stories are hard to tell is because you say the wrong thing in somebody else's opinion, and now you're basically under attack, whether you meant well or you didn't, whatever it is. And to kind of see that barrier drop a little bit and that protectiveness go away while speaking to them is probably the best part of this process, because there really aren't repercussions. It's not like we're just going to start airing things out. But it made me aware of like the very precarious situation a lot of these players are in, especially Jeter, and how that impacts people on a personal level, like how that impacts them behind the scenes, and how that influences the way that they interact with the public and behave and all of those things.
Yeah, I think you hit on a really important topic for us today too, is that dividing line to where people don't want to be in the middle on issues, it's either absolutely one way or absolutely the other way. And for whether it's for clicks or for page views, for it's selling magazines and everything, you've got to. You guys feel like it feels like there's pressure to make news, even if there isn't, or controversy, to stir up controversy, even if there really isn't that much.
I think players, like Randy was saying, and the big joke
Mhm.
about Derek Jeter was he'll always talk, he'll never say anything interesting, right?
Mhm.
And I think that's the epitome of a guy who could never say anything interesting, because if he did say something interesting at the time he was playing in New York, it would have made headlines. It would have been twisted. It would have taken away from what was going on with the team. So I personally, at The Athletic, don't feel the need to play the clickbait game. I don't feel the need to like create a story. I know other places do. I know other reporters, feel a little bit more pressure. But I think the pressure a lot of the times is on these players to not say something that they're going to regret, or not say something that can be twisted. And I think you see it all the time on social media. I mean, I don't even feel comfortable ever making jokes on social media, because like they just don't. People just twist things around. They just don't land. I tweeted the night of the Hall of Fame announcement that if David Ortiz's personality was in Barry Bonds would probably be in the Hall of Fame, right? And people just took it so many different places. They took it as like didn't think David Ortiz was a Hall of Famer. Not what I said. Why was I excluding Roger Clemens with this tweet? People just take it and rip it and like just do whatever they want with it. And I think players see that. They're like, okay, I can be dull and never get in any trouble, or I can be interesting and find myself in hot water. And most of them would rather go with the latter. And that was always the Derek Jeter playbook.
Yeah,
indeed. And I personally found some of the similar sorts of things that you're talking about for the Hall of Fame voting. If my ballot doesn't have every single one of the candidates that the person that's tweeting at me has, then I'm an idiot, or the Baseball Writers Association is an idiot. And it just gets whipped up, unnecessarily to such huge and ridiculous levels. It's difficult. It's difficult. Some more about. Go ahead, Randy.
I also think a lot of this depends on where someone is reporting from, or the company that they're a part of. Like, I think The Athletic allows their journalists to speak their minds and have a very specific perspective if one comes. I think that Britt can correct me if I'm wrong, but the sense I get is that there's a little bit more freedom to tell stories and like have that person's perspective and voice and then go with it. It feels like in other places that's not necessarily the case, or the mere existence of an outlet is strictly for clickbait, because it's low hanging fruit and it generates money and generates interest, and it's the easiest thing to do. So I think we have to distinguish between different outlets and whose intention is what. Some outlets, their whole point of existence is for clickbait, and for others, it's to tell more nuanced stories. So I know with me, like I'm not Ken Rosenthal. I don't do the like, let me break a story if I hear something game. Like, I could care less. I'm not into that. That's not my job. That's not my interest. But I know certain things just because of the Jeter doc. Like, I spoke to a lot of people who told me stuff. Like, they told me from the horse's mouth. And I would make like a general tweet about something related to the Yankees, and then there were all these outlets like basically twisting everything and trying to make it seem like I was some like breaking news reporter. I was like
Right.
Ken Rosenthal and Joel Sherman, and like I said this about this player. And it was like,
I remember one of those tweets that you're like, I'm not a journalist, I'm a filmmaker.
Yeah.
I don't work for ESPN.
Right. I didn't say Carlos Correa is going to the Yankees. Like, Carlos Correa wasn't even on my mind. Like, it had nothing to do with that. But then, like those outlets want to create something. They'll go after, anybody. Like, I'd have nothing to do with that world. They were still doing it. So I think the outlets have as much to do with it as the specific people involved.
Britt, any more to add to that?
No, I think those were great points. I think there's a big difference between certain media outlets and between people's jobs, and those are some great points to make for sure.
I think a lot of people are interested in, again, the behind the curtain kind of thing that we're talking about here. And I will give you both an opportunity to just, let me phrase it this way, as opposed to maybe somebody that you didn't get along with or anything like that. Have you ever been called out in public by an athlete, a coach, a manager? And I will start just to say, for instance, it was 2002 World Series. I'm walking into Angels Stadium, and the Giants and Angels are playing. Barry Bonds had hit his first World Series home run the night before, and I happened to be walking in the park with, at the same time Barry Bonds was, and we're walking across the field toward the clubhouse. And so I'm sitting here, my heart is starting to beat really, really fast, and like I'm here with Barry Bonds. I gotta say something. And so I try and, introduce myself as we're walking along, and just ask, hey, Barry, did you get the baseball? Did you get that back? Because that was at a time when everybody was, what happened to the baseballs? McGuire's and Sosa's and all of those. And so I just figured I would strike up a conversation. It's like, what are you talking about? I don't need that. I don't need to wear any. He was very abrupt with me, as he was with just about any other writer. But I took that personally, and I felt really embarrassed that, had I asked a bad question, or what, and it sort of bothered me for a long time. Have you all had any instances where an athlete or somebody has called you out or singled you out for anything, and made you feel, that small?
Were there other people that heard this, Steve? Or was
no,
it just you?
it was just
Okay.
me and just Barry Bonds walking across the field, which was pretty surreal in itself.
So you weren't even shamed publicly. You were only shamed by Barry, and it was bad.
Yeah, but
I've been yelled at in like press conferences in front of people on TV, which is what I thought you meant. I mean, the list would be a lot longer if it was.
Well,
just
I've other stories, but I want to hear yours.
To me. Yeah, I had one spring training had a player who refused to speak after he pitched, and he was a starter if I was in the scrum. So that was a fun time. The Orioles PR staff had to speak to him. Him and I had to have and the Orioles actually handled this really well. They immediately kind of removed me, put us in a room, and they were like, work out, whatever it is. You don't have to be best friends, but like, you need to be able to speak to the media, and Brittany is in the media, and she has to talk to you after your starts.
Was it something you wrote?
No, it was not something I wrote.
Okay.
It was just a personal issue that player seemed to have with me. And we were never close, but we did get to a point where at least it wasn't like, hey, I'm not speaking if Brittany's around. And, I was maybe 22, 23 at this point in time, and still kind of trying to feel my way around the job. And so that was incredibly embarrassing because he did it in front of the other reporters, which I think is probably half the fun to them sometimes. Mm-hmm. So that one stands out as a memorable one. Dave Tremblay, who was the Orioles manager in my first year, screamed at me in a press conference. So his job was on the line. Again, it was just like bad place, bad time. So much so that people called me like aside later and were like, don't worry about it. This guy's just mad that he's going to lose his job soon, whatever. He apologized to me the next day, but that was aired on mass and done in front of a room full of people. And again, I was early on in my career. It's interesting how all those things seem to be early on in my career. I think maybe now if it happened to me, I would just kind of be like, whatever, I don't care if you don't like me. But when you're young and you're trying to make a name for yourself, it's devastating, right? You're like, well, the last thing you want to do is stand out, right. Especially as a young female on a beat. Just the last thing you want to do. And you are standing out when these things are happening. So those were two of the more humiliating ones. I've been screamed at before in a clubhouse in Toronto when one of the players got sent down. The other reporter was a little afraid of him. And so kind of how it goes is if some guy gets sent down, and God, I'm in the sun again. This is good thing this table moves. How it goes in baseball beat writing is if it's a sensitive topic, the person who has the closest relationship to the guy usually goes first and goes towards him because your chances are better. Mm-hmm. So I go towards him, and this is like a bunch of the players are in there. It's post game. And I'm like, hey, really sorry you got sent down. and he whips around and he's like, "What do you want me to say, Brittany? What the curse word, curse word, curse word do you want me to say?" And it's just like screaming that over and over again.
Yeah.
And I was like, "Oh, okay, don't need you to say anything, thanks." And so then he gets hammered that night and is like texting me he's sorry or whatever. But that was another super embarrassing one. Again, early on in my career, I don't know if we're sensing a pattern here, but I've had quite a lot. Honestly, I've been yelled at quite a lot.
Randy, you ever had anybody that you were interviewing, go off the rails?
Yeah. Oh, not on yeah. There was a confrontation on camera with one person. I can't go into the details yet because I can't reveal everything about the film. But yeah, I mean, yeah, this person like pushed back, and I don't work in baseball media. I don't ever have to see you or speak to you again. So I just push back. It's just like, I mean, you're already in the chair, so I already have what I need. And if you want to be a, what, I'll just return the favor. So, I don't mind pushing back. Like, I mean, even if you follow me on Twitter, I push back on people. So, I guess that's part of being from the Bronx or whatever. You have to do it every day. But yeah, we had somebody that pushed back on camera during the interview, and I pushed right back. Like, you're not gonna try to bully me or like leverage whatever success you have against me. I could care less. Like, that doesn't mean anything to me. So yeah, I mean, it was one moment, and then we settled it, and then we went, we kept going on with the interview. But I let it be known in a respectful manner that, like, I'm not intimidated. I could care less. Like, I just need you to answer these questions, and we'll just change the tenor of the conversation. So
when we watch the Jeter film, will we recognize that instance when it comes up? Do you think? Is it that
we're still deciding?
Okay,
we're still deciding.
You could use that stuff though, right, Randy?
Oh,
like
yeah,
if they go, I thought so. Yeah.
Oh yeah, if we put it in there, you'll know exactly what it is and who it is with. Like, it's just making sure. Like, I always believe that you shouldn't embarrass people. It's ultimately not my story. I'm helping to tell it, but I'm not at the center of it. I'm not Derek. I'm not these players. I'm not the journalist. Like, I'm putting it together, but I'm not trying to influence the way an audience thinks about particular people that are involved. So I don't want to have a heavy hand and embarrass anybody just for the sake of embarrassment or for me to ridicule you. If it makes sense story-wise and it works and it's revealing, then I would put it in. So I think the only thing now is, does it work story-wise? And if it does, I will absolutely put it in. But I don't want to just pick on somebody who doesn't have a chance to defend themselves with me making that choice just to be a jerk about it or to embarrass somebody. I don't believe in that. But I'm definitely trying to figure out a way to include it so everybody else can see it. So.
Well, that's some of those iconic moments too, when you see emotion and exactly when people tell you exactly what they feel. I'll throw this in real quick too. When, again, really, really early in my career, I was covering a college basketball game, and the late Jim Valvano was the coach, and they lost a game at the buzzer at the University of Virginia, and there was a lot of discussion about the rules and a controversial play at the end. And I was a radio reporter, and I had to file a report as soon as possible after the game. And so I broke in after all of that discussion had gone on for a while. Just, Coach, did you feel like your team played well enough to win the game? And I will never forget this, because he looked at me and said, like, "What, was you at the game? Or was you outside somewhere?" And I just felt 1,000 daggers, poking me. But then he took a beat, and then he answered the question and gave a fantastic answer. And I had my sound bite that I needed. I picked up my tape recorder, ran out, and it was, it turned out to be, although very scary for me, a good report, exactly what I needed, and it worked out. We got 5 minutes left. How about we just go around the table and say, we've heard a lot from both of you about some of the difficulties, but how about some of your favorite players to talk to interview, and to talk baseball with, that you've encountered? I think that's a good note to end on. Britt, anybody come to mind right off the top of your head? More than one, maybe?
God, there's so many. Adam Jones, I mean, we still talk baseball a lot, is a great guy to talk baseball, life, sports, anything with. He's a fun guy. Buck Showalter is amazing to just listen to talk about the game. He's got so much knowledge. He's been around for so long. I really always enjoyed listening to him. Joe Madden is another one who's great to listen to. Zach Britton, who's currently with the Yankees, is their player rep, is another guy I've always really enjoyed. Nelson Cruz. I mean, the longer you do this, the more like the list keeps getting longer, and I'm sure I'm leaving guys out. But I think the more you do this, the more you just really appreciate, like, even like the last guy on the roster, like those guys always have a great story. It's just nobody spends the time getting to know them. And I think just what I miss the most about the COVID days is like not being able to go into the clubhouse and talk to the last guy on the roster about what being up there even means, because it's such a different feeling for them than a Max Scherzer of the world. And Max Scherzer, by the way, another great guy to talk about baseball with, has so much knowledge. You walk away from every conversation. Yeah, thinking like, God, he's so smart. Like, I just learned so much talking to Max Scherzer. And to me, that's the most fun part about this game. And I hope it doesn't get taken away from us.
Indeed. And I think, too, when we were covering the World Series in 2016, we found out what a good and insightful person David Ross was, talking about the last guy on the roster throughout the Cubs playoff run. He was like a go-to guy to, why is it? It's Alex Avila when the Tigers were really good in the playoffs. Seemed like, those catchers, and it makes sense seeing how many catchers are in the majors. Randy, any other guys? I mean, you've had, from Willie Randolph to Reggie Jackson, any others that come to mind for you?
Jimmy Rollins, Gary Sheffield, David Cone, Buck Showalter, Gerald Williams, Harold Reynolds, Jorge Posada, CC Sabathia. CC's great.
That's a good one.
He continues to be, yes.
Yeah, CC feels like you're just hanging out with him somewhere. You're just like just talking in a barbershop or something. Like he'll
tell it like it is too.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's for sure.
Alfonso Soriano was also great and insightful, and very confident, but like not in a off-putting way. He just knew how good he was and paid attention to a lot. And there's a lot of guys, but those are some of the ones that like really stood out. And like really, Bernie also. I mean, Bernie was like what you saw when he played, and like that character and that like class. And how incredibly intelligent he is and insightful. Same thing with Gerald Williams, incredibly insightful and very like global. And how they just view people and view the game, and kind of being able to merge those two things together was like really impressive. So, and David Cone was like amazing.
Yeah, good to see him Sunday Night Baseball too.
That
should be a lot of fun.
I've wanted that for years, so I'm happy.
All right, yes, indeed. And great names. I will throw one more in, and it's a shame. I think he got knocked off the Hall of Fame ballot this year, but Torrey Hunter, for me, was a fantastic interview and always had insightful things to say whenever I talk to him. So I will add him to the list. And so, hey, Britt, Randy, thank you so much for being here. This has been a lot of fun for me, and hopefully for everybody who is listening today. It's great to kind of take a break from the numbers and talk about people too. So
thank you
so much.
Thank you guys.
Thanks for having us.
That was amazing. Seriously. And there's no surprise that Bernie Williams being a jazz guitarist and all is that insightful. Randy, do us all a favor. Can you get like Bernie and Paul O'Neill on the drums or something? And just get some clip of that for us?
I'll try.
That would be a dream. But no,
any real quick, Randy, too, any idea when we might be able to see the Jeter doc out?
I can't say.
Okay.
I can't say because they also haven't. They have a couple dates and they haven't decided yet, so they don't know.
All right.
So I'm waiting. I'm waiting just like everybody else at this point.
All right. Well, I couldn't consider myself a baseball journalist without asking that question.
It will be this year.
All right.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. That's what we like to hear.
Awesome.
We all can't wait for it. Really, thank you all so much for being a part of this. It makes it so much better having all of you here. Fantastic stories, and I really appreciate getting that look behind the curtain. So thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thanks
Nick.
for the invite.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right.